Hi guys, thank you for clicking on this video. I want to show you a small montage of Joe Biden calling his fellow Americans racist.
Domestic terrorism from white supremacists is the most lethal terrorist threat in the homeland. We know now we must confront and defeat political extremism, white supremacy, and domestic terrorism. White supremacy, domestic terrorism, that we must confront and we will defeat. And we won't ignore what our intelligence agencies have determined to be the most lethal terrorist threat to the homeland today. White supremacy is terrorism. I would make sure that we, in fact, focus on how to deal with the rise of white supremacy.
I'm going to show you the real Joe Biden. First, I want to introduce you to some of his friends. Have you heard of Senator Robert Byrd of West Virginia? He was a member of the KKK, but he wasn't just any member. Robert Byrd was an exalted cyclops that's fourth highest in command. What does Robert Byrd have to do with Joe Biden? They were great friends. Do you want to know how Joe's friend felt about black people? Here's a quote from his autobiography. "I shall never fight in the armed forces with a Negro by my side. Rather, I should die 1,000 times and see Old Glory trampled in the dirt, never to rise again, than to see this beloved land of ours become degraded by race mongrels, a throwback to the blackest specimen from the wilds." Now, knowing that Senator Byrd was such a racist, listen to Joe Biden speak so fondly of him.
Although I and my colleagues behind me revere the Senate, Robert C. Byrd elevated the Senate. For a lot of us, he was a friend, and he was a mentor, and he was a guide. Of course, it's more than the name we're not going to forget. It's his courage. I'm not even going to ask God to bless you because he already has, and I know where you are.
Is it safe to say they were pretty close? Byrd is also known for filibustering the Civil Rights Act of 1964, speaking for 14 hours straight. Also, he and his Democrat friends could deny black people the right to vote. This is who Joe Biden became good friends with. Wait, I got more. Have you heard of Strom Thurmond?
I have pledged to use every resource available to fight this legislation, which would give the federal government the power to force not only public integration, but private integration as well.
Strom didn't simply disapprove of blacks integrating with whites. He absolutely despised it.
There's not enough troops in the army to force the Southern people to break down segregation and admit the Negro race into our theaters, into our swimming pools, into our homes, and into our churches.
Now that we all know what a racist Strom is, let's listen to Joe Biden talk about their friendship.
Strom and I shared a life in the Senate for over 30 years. We shared a good life there, and it made a difference. I grew to know him. I looked into his heart, and I saw a man, the whole man. I tried to understand him. I learned from him. We became good friends. I'm not sure exactly why or how it happened, Nancy, but you know we did.
Now, maybe Joe was just being nice because he was at a funeral. It would be interesting to know how Joe spoke about him in a different setting.
I came to the United States Senate, a 29-year-old fella, and turns out one of my closest friends ends up being Strom Thurmond. If you had told me when I entered the United States Senate that one of the people that I would have the closest relationship with in the Senate would be Strom Thurmond, I would have told you you were crazy.
Just like Senator Byrd, Strom also filibustered the Civil Rights Act. Strom did it in 1957, Byrd did it in 1964. But while Senator Byrd spoke for 14 straight hours, Senator Thurmond spoke for 24 hours straight, all to deny black people the right to vote. Again, this is one of Joe's good friends. Strom also demanded the FBI open an investigation into Dr. King. Unfortunately, the only person to call Joe out on this was his vice president.
Let's be very clear that the senators that he is speaking of with such adoration are individuals who made and built their reputation on segregation. The Ku Klux Klan celebrated the election of one of them.
Now, with this in mind, Listen to Joe Biden claim that those who don't support his voter ID law are on the side of George Wallace.
How do you want to be remembered? At consequential moments in history, they present a choice. Do you want to be on the side of Dr. King or George Wallace?
Wallace was the racist governor of Alabama who also despised desegregation.
And I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
A little bit more about Wallace. In 1963, the University of Alabama was about to admit the first two black students, James Hood and Vivian Malone. Wallace was such a racist that he stood in the doorway and blocked them from entering the school. Even when the deputy district attorney and federal marshals appeared on site, Wallace still wouldn't get out of the way. The only reason Wallace finally moved was because President Kennedy deputized the Alabama National Guard. That put them under the control of the president instead of the governor. You talk about a racist, right? And yet Joe is comparing his fellow Americans to George Wallace simply because they support voter ID. That is a terrible thing to do. Who would want any connection to this man? Joe and George Wallace were actually pretty good friends. When Wallace talked about our country's problems, he said those problems could be solved because of the fine, ingenious people like Joe Biden. He went around telling everyone about it while campaigning. Joe was actually so fond of Wallace, he said he wished he had someone like Wallace in his own party. Biden also bragged that George Wallace gave him an award in 1973. It was during the same speech where Biden bragged that his state, Delaware, was on the south side of the Civil War. When the Civil War first began, we had the Union in the north. Those are the states you see here in blue. That's where slavery was illegal. Fighting against this was the Confederate states of the South. Those are the ones that you see that are in gray. But you see the green states in the middle? These were called border states. This meant that while they were part of the Union, they were still able to keep slaves. Listen to how proud he is that while his states were part of the Union, they really identified more with those in the South, where slavery was legal.
We mentioned you're in South Carolina right now on the campaign trail. 30 seconds or less. What kind of a chance would a northeastern liberal like Joe Biden stand in the South if you were running in Democratic primaries against Southerners like Mark Warner and John Edwards?
Better than anybody else. And you don't know my state. My state was a slave state. My state is a border state. My state is the 8th largest black population in the country. My state is anything from a northeast liberal state.
Well, good for you, Joe. You let everyone know that your state supported slavery. You're obviously very proud of that. Let's talk about busing. After the Civil Rights Act, the federal government required states to integrate black and white students, and they would withhold any funding to schools that refused to comply. A lot of white Democrats didn't want this. So when the federal government mandated that states bus black students into white schools, Joe Biden took the lead against it. Here he is talking about how many hearings he's held on busing.
I just held 3 days of hearing, two days of hearings in the Judiciary Committee on another bill I have beyond this that deals with busing.
And it was at one of these hearings where you said you were worried that your white children would grow up in a racial jungle. And for those of you who claim this is right-wing nonsense, here's a transcript of that meeting. Joe's comments can be found on page 251. Let's go back to the press conference.
But no matter what your intent, there are going to be those who say it's a segregated thing, it's a question of race, and that you have set back the movement of desegregation of schools. How would you answer that?
The way I answer that is I predict that the young black leadership of America will overwhelmingly decide with me.
Yeah, that didn't happen.
It was hurtful to hear you talk about the reputations of two United States senators who built their reputations and career on the segregation of race in this country. And it was not only that, but you also worked with them to oppose busing. And, you know, there was a little girl in California who was part of the second class to integrate her public schools. and she was bused to school every day. And that little girl was me. Do you agree today that you were wrong to oppose busing in America then?
No,
do you agree?
I did not oppose busing in America. What I opposed is busing ordered by the Department of Education. That's what I opposed.
Well, there was a failure of states to integrate public schools in America. I was part of the second class to integrate Berkeley, California public schools almost 2 decades after Brown v. Board of Education.
Because your city council made that decision. It was a local decision.
So that's where the federal government must step in. That's why we have the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act. That's why we need to pass the Equality Act.
Biden was so opposed to integration, he teamed up with racist Senator James Eastland. Here he is in his office. You can see he's got pictures of Jefferson Davis, Robert Lee, Stonewall Jackson. He's very proud of the Confederacy. Like all of Joe's racist friends, James Eastland was strongly opposed to desegregation. Speaking at the White Citizens Council, Eastland said he would rather close schools and completely abolish certain school districts rather than admit black students.
The state can close down a school. The state can abolish a school district and create another one. And so I say that it is absolutely essential that each of the southern states adopt a state policy, a state program to preserve racial segregation.
Back when we were a civilized society, people really did protest peacefully. During the Montgomery bus boycott, black people band together and refused to take the bus. They would either carpool or simply walk, rather than patronize an institution that segregated them. Here they are waving to an empty bus. This lasted for 381 days and angered a lot of Democrats, especially Eastland. Of all of Joe's racist friends, Eastland was probably the worst. In response to this boycott, Eastland said the following. I'm going to quote him now. Bear with me because I don't want to get banned. In every stage of this bus boycott, we have been opposed and degraded because of black, slimy, juicy, unbearably stinking, read it, African flesh eaters. When in the course, this is incredible, when in the course of human events, it becomes necessary to abolish the Negro race, proper methods should be used. Among them are guns, bows and arrows, slingshots, and knives. All whites are created equal with certain rights. Among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of dead N-word. I can't say it. This is who Joe forms an alliance with to fight desegregation. And Joe and Eastland weren't just friends. Joe considered him his mentor. Here's a letter Joe wrote saying he was particularly honored to serve on one of his committees. I shall do my best to measure up to the trust you have placed in me. But the best part is the handwritten part at the end. Senator Byrd informs me that you were especially helpful on my behalf. Senator Byrd, that's the KKK guy. What are friends for, right, Joe? Biden also thanked him again for being put on the Foreign Relations Committee, writing, I will do my best to measure up to your expectations. Here's another letter thanking Eastland for his support for the anti-busing bill. Biden thanks Eastland again 2 weeks later. Joe wrote to Eastland the following year, asking for Eastland's support on another bill to keep our schools segregated. But better than all the letters, let's listen to Joe tell us how he sought Eastland's help for re-election.
So as Jim Eastland said to me in 1978 when I was running for election, he said, he never called me Senator or Joe. He didn't call me son. He always called me young man. And he said, young man, he said, what would Jim Eastland do for you in Delaware? And I was in a tough re-election. I said, Mr. Chairman, some places you'd help and some places you'd hurt. And he looked at me, all kidding aside, in the Senate dining room with Herman Talmadge sitting there and said, well, I'll come to Delaware and campaign for you again, you son, whichever will help you the most.
A couple of other things. Have you heard of the Dornan rider? After schools were told to desegregate, some schools simply refused. Some of them became private and admitted only white students. But those schools were still allowed their tax-exempt status from the IRS. When Republican Senator Jacob Javits introduced an amendment to strike it down, Senator Biden voted against it. Do you remember when Trump said during the Charlottesville protests there were fine people on both sides, and how Joe Biden took that out of context and brought it up during the debate?
And they asked the president what he thought. He said there were very fine people on both sides. No president has ever said anything like that. He said there were very fine people in both groups. They're chanting anti-Semitic slogans, carrying flags.
Forget about it not being true. Joe's position is you cannot look at people who value the Confederate flag and refer to them as fine people. That's just not allowed. Have you ever heard of the United Daughters of the Confederacy? They had been granted a design patent on their Confederate flag every year it came up for renewal since 1894. But in 1993, their renewal was denied. And this really seemed to upset Joe.
Senator Carol Moseley Braun not granting a federal charter to a organization made up of many fine people who continue to display the Confederate flag.
I guess it's only a problem if Trump says it, right? And speaking of the Confederates, Joe also compared his fellow Americans to Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy.
Do you want to be the side of Abraham Lincoln or Jefferson Davis?
Yet you were the one who voted to restore his citizenship, Joe. And while you and your party supported the removal of Confederate statue Robert E. Lee, you also voted to grant him citizenship a year earlier. One last thing. Did you know that Joe Biden lived in a house in a development that prohibited ownership by black people? It actually said this on the deed. I know a lot of people are going to say, well, this happened a really long time ago and people could change. I believe that, right? With that in mind, let's listen to some of the things Joe is saying today.
You cannot go to a 7-Eleven or a Dunkin' Donuts unless you have a slight Indian accent. I'm not joking.
We believe you, Joe. We know that you think that. Now listen to Joe say that minorities are synonymous with people who are poor and not very bright.
We have this notion that somehow if you're poor, you cannot do it. Poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids.
Joe believes Hispanics are not getting the shot because they're all here illegally.
It's awful hard as well to get Latinx vaccinated as well. Why? They're worried that they'll be vaccinated and deported.
There are more than 60 million Hispanic Americans here, Joe. And no, not all of them broke the law. Now let's listen to Joe claim that all African Americans think alike.
By the way, what you all know, but most people don't know, unlike the African American community, with notable exceptions, the Latino community is an incredibly diverse community with incredibly different attitudes about different things.
This guy's an idiot. I'm sorry. The last one is my favorite. I'm sure you've heard this before. Listen to Joe say that Barack Obama is the first African American that is clean.
I mean, you got the first sort of mainstream African American who is articulate and bright and clean and nice looking guy. I mean, that's a storybook, man. Yeah.
Well, that's all I got for now, guys. I'm sure I could find more, but I want to be mindful of your time. If you like this video, please consider subscribing. It'll motivate me to make more, and I hope to see you on the next one. Thank you.
There's not a racist bone in my body. I've been involved in civil rights my whole career.